Hey, everyone, we'll wait just 2 or 3 more seconds here just to let everybody get into the session here for us. All right, well, thank you all for joining our LIDMA learning session today. We're going to talk about generative AI, what it is and what it means for the insurance industry. So my name is Roy Goodhart. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Vice President and the Head of Product for North America here at iPipeline. I've got a great partner with me today helping present. Her name is Harim Naveed. She is the AVP of Machine Learning and Operations and Governance at Munich Re. So glad to have her with me today as well. So before we kick things off, I really thought what I would do is just share with you kind of where my aha moment came around Gen AI. This was really about, I don't know, a year, maybe a year and a half ago. My brother was coming through town with his son, Jack. I hadn't seen him for a while. They had moved away and we really hadn't kind of kept in touch, but we decided we were going to go to dinner that night. And when we were there, Jack was so excited. He graduated from college. He graduated from a really prestigious university, one that, you know, these kids have to be super smart on, certainly somewhere I couldn't get into. And we started talking about all of the things that he had done and the things that he'd been doing and how he had fun at those parties and what he was kind of doing there and all the trips he had been on with his buddies. And you know, I was amazed. He actually did that all while he was working full time, and he was running about 20 credit hours every semester through there. And I said, "Wow, Jack, that seems like you've done that so easily. I don't know, you know, how you did." I said, "When I was in school, I struggled. I struggled with kind of all the aspects of what those were. I worked a lot too, and I played. I probably played more than I should have in retrospect there. But you know, I decided I was going to do it. I was going to be a marketing major, and the reason why I picked marketing major is because I thought it was going to be something that was easy. I could take that, I could learn from it, utilize some of those skills later in life, because you could take that major and go off and get a whole bunch of different jobs. But what I found is when I got in there, marketing majors actually have to do stuff. You have to go in, you have to learn how to build a business plan. You have to write marketing plans for it. You have to do all these creative stuff. But at the end of the day, you're writing a ton of papers. I was not very good at writing papers, and like Jack was. And, you know, a traditional student, when you come back and you write papers, it may look something kind of like this. You know, you get your assignment for your paper, you kind of going to go these ups and downs with the work that you have to do. And at the end of the day, you got this paper that's due over here at a certain time. And most people, you know, you kind of get there, you got the end. You don't have to worry about it, do a little proofreading, and you're out the door. For me, things were a lot different. This was me. I really didn't do much until kind of the middle of that, kind of stepped it up and then went, oh my gosh, I didn't really do anything. I got to finish that at the end. I struggled with kind of keeping the wheels on the wagon for those things. And then, but I did pretty well. I got pretty good grades through it. And then my senior year came rolling along, and I had this thing that we had to do, which was the thesis. And that thesis was going to be about 100 pages or 120 pages. And it was something that you had to work on all year. And I stepped back and I'm like, oh my goodness, how am I going to really do this? I need to come up with a different plan than what I have, because what I've done before really isn't going to work here. So I put together this plan. It was really kind of this little bit where I say, I'm going to do some here, I'm going to do a little bit more in the middle, I'm going to do quite a bit in the end, but we're still going to get it done. It was this little stair-steppy type thing. I could get my head around that and I could work through those things. What happened though is I come along, and those first 2 months, I had some great ideas. And to be honest, we didn't really do much. So I'm like, oh, I gotta revamp my plan. My plan looked like this, pretty much the same, just shortened it out a little bit. Those 2 months in the middle that were there, maybe wrote a page or two that was through it. And I woke up and I'm 2 months out, and I really didn't have much. So I'm like, all right, better kick this up, better get going on it. And that 2 months turned into 2 weeks. And that 2 weeks turned into 3 days. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I've got 2 pages of my 120 pages that I have to do for my thesis. How am I going to get this done? It took me a day of that planning just to figure out how I was going to do that. And I said, oh, I'm not going to go to sleep, just going to bang this out. I think I drank more Mountain Dew in those 2 days than I had in the previous 2 years. And as I'm telling this story, my nephew's just laughing away at it. And, you know, we come through, I say, hey, you know, I did it. I busted it out. I'm going to date myself here for a second, but it was before the internet. I actually had to take this thumb drive down to Kinko's. I had to have it printed off and bound up for us. And I walked in and I gave it to my professor, and I was so happy that I did it. And I got my C. I got my C. I could graduate. I got it done. So my my cousin or my nephew, he's just laughing. I'm like, what's so funny? And he goes, you know what? He goes, I use GPT chat for mine and I got an A. And at that moment, I threw my piece of sushi at him and I realized that this whole generative AI thing had already started to change the world. So for the next 25 minutes, Harim and I are going to kind of rapid fire through some things for you. We're going to do a little bit of a quick one-on-one or 101 on AI and Gen AI. We're going to cover some cool Gen AI tools that are out there that you folks might be interested in, some of the things that you can do. I'm going to show you a quick demo for the insurance side of the house, just so you can see maybe how kind of GPT chat can work for that. Some areas where you as direct marketers can focus on. And we're going to talk about how carriers are embracing this today. And then at the end, we're going to wrap up with some areas of concern. Now, if we get enough time left over at the end, we'll take some questions. If not, just throw those things in the chat for us as you remember them as you go through it. We'll take those offline. We'll get them put out and with the video, so that way you've got it. All right, so let's kick things off. So our good friends over at Celent just recently did a little bit of a survey that was out there to insurance carriers. And what we found is that 50% of all of the insurance carriers in the life and health side are currently planning or are in the process of planning to test large machine learning by the end of the year. 50%, that's a big number. And then 75% of the largest insurance carriers in this space are already doing it. So 3/4 of our carriers that we're working with out there are already thinking about this machine learning and how it can benefit them. Now, PwC actually did another survey out there. This was really more on the Fortune 1000 type companies, but they did an interview of 700 CEOs and CIOs that were out there. 72% of those folks out there believe that AI will be their most significant advantage going into the future. So huge. So we know all of this stuff, right? We know that AI and the Gen AI, we can't go anywhere without hearing it anymore. So let's kind of see what that is. What is generative AI? Just for those folks that are out there, it took me a minute to kind of go through it. I'm a little slow on certain parts too, but when we look at it, so we shouldn't confuse generative AI with kind of that traditional AI and machine learning data sets. We take all that stuff, right? All that traditional AI that was worked out there, that learning algorithms, that computing power that we did, all the data that's been collected over the web. And that's really what comes to be that power and that breakthrough for the Gen AI piece for us. Now, there's many types of AI. Generative AI just happens to be one of those. And what it really means is, just as the name suggests, it creates new content. So it takes things like all the data and the elements of the web and all of those things, and you can ask it to do anything that you want, and it creates new content from scratch rather than just taking the data and displaying it differently there. So let's take a typical use cases of generative AI. These are the ones that you see a lot of. The image generation, it's great. You can come in, you can type in something like, hey, show me or build me a picture of a dog that's going to space in the form of a Picasso painting. And it'll generate that image out for you. It's totally original. It's not something that it's pulling from somewhere else. It builds it for you. That video synthesis, very similar. You can drag in different images, you can drag in text and put in text, and basically at the end of the day, it comes back and it composes that video for you in a format, in a way that you want to do it, in a stylistic way that you want to do it. The language generation is something similar to kind of that chat GPT part that's there, but it's things that will help you translate languages into different ones. So Spanish to English is an example, but it also helps us take things from a computer language and transfer it into another computer language as well. And then music composition. This is a great one. I actually played around with this not too long ago. You can take a genre, you can take a specific composer, you can take a whole bunch of stuff, and it will create specific new music for you from scratch. So these are some things that, you know, you hear people talking about. There's a lot more to it than just this. There's a ton of business cases, and some of those we'll go over today. So, whoops, back us up here for a second. So where does generative AI kind of fit into the bigger landscape? So the term AI is really just more of an umbrella. It can encompasses a whole bunch of different ones. Gen AI is just kind of a subcategory of what those are. Here's a few others. So let's take a look at some of those. So we have reactive machines. Reactive machines are things like your self-driving cars. They can't learn from anything. They're pre-programmed out, but they know if you need to turn somewhere or stop something, it can understand its surroundings from there. We have theory of mind. This is something that powers like your virtual assistants that are out there. It takes this language that's out there. It understands like mental states and other pieces that are there. So it can interact with different bots or different things that are out there. Plus it can work with humans. So a great one that you normally see. This is narrow AI, which is also called weak AI. It generates product suggestions. So things like when you come out and you want to look for, hey, I need a shirt that's red, that's whatever. It goes out and it finds different products that kind of meet those things for you for it. Also makes recommendations based upon your previous purchase histories and those types of pieces. A lot of us see that with, things like Amazon and other things that we do. Supervised learning, what this does is it allows us to come back and it pairs up these images. So it can look at an image and then it can determine what type of output it needs, and it can compare those so it can make the identifications behind those. So if I'm looking at a video, it can do things like facial recognition through there. Or if I come back and I upload a collage of things, it can separate that out and it can say, hey, these are all watches as an example, or perfume or eyeglasses or anything along those lines. So kind of a different way to do that. So let's figure out, where does generative AI, kind of fit in there? It fits in a lot of these models. The difference here, again, is that those things, although they may create certain contents, it's a side effect of their primary function, unlike generative AI, which is really its primary function is to create those things. So let's take a look at some cool Gen AI tools for a second. These are some that I have used in the past, and I kind of liked them, so I thought I'd throw them out there. There's a thing called AI Lawyer. It's a legal service. I can come back in and I can put in a contract. It can read the contract for me. It can make recommendations for us. It can build a new one that's there. It can answer certain legal questions if you've got that in a specific state or a specific issue, those types of things. For the lawyers on the phone, not to replace you all for it. Certainly need to make sure you throw a disclaimer in there that, and the AI lawyer says that too. Go talk to a real lawyer before you make any true decisions off of that. The Rebecca AI one is one that I really like. It's an idea generation tool. So basically you come in, you put an idea in, and it helps you validate the idea. So it'll ask you different questions. You can narrow stuff down. It goes off the web. It pulls some stuff back through there. It helps you understand your competitive state differently of that idea. Is it something actually worth doing? So it's a pretty cool little solution that's out there. Video gen is exactly what it means. It helps you generate videos. I like this one because you can pull in different images and it will actually create new content images. That's like I can pull in a model as an example, and it'll say, I want something like this, and it'll pull it in and make the video for me off of it. Otter and Motion are two great things for me. It's a meeting notes area, or it takes meeting notes, Otter does, and it helps take certain key aspects of those, and it helps me understand what are the important parts of those notes, so that way I can focus on what they are. So I can take a recording of this as an example. It comes back and it tells me the key things that I need to focus on for it. Motion, this is the one I wish when I was going to school, it could help me kind of keep on track. This one is great because you can come in and it gives you the ability to put in all of your tasks, and then it learns based upon how you set priorities, and it will start to rank and put your priorities differently for you, so you don't have to think about all the things that are associated with it. So again, just some cool Gen AI type stuff. There's a lot of pieces that are out there. When we get done here at the end, I'm going to show you a reference point that you can go out to. There's a place called, there's an AI for that, and you can see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these that are out there. So ChatGPT, this is really the most popular one that's out there. It's the one that's in the news. It's the one that everybody hears about. So really, what is the GPT part of that? What in the heck does it really mean? So really, it's broken down into three pieces. It's the generative part, it's the pre-trained part, and it's the transformer part. That's what it stands for. So in basic layman's terms, that generative part, it can take the things that you pulled and it can build text on its own. It can build a story for you. You can take a persona and write a story. Write me a horror story in the persona of Mark Twain as an example, and it'll create fresh new content for you. Same thing on the artist side. We talked about the dog and the side of Picasso that's there. The pre-trained part of this is that it goes out and it's really, before you get to it, it has learned a bunch of stuff. It's gone through masses and masses of amounts of things like books and websites and all these other kind of places that are out there. But really what it does is it helps learn that. So when you come back to it, it helps put that generative part back to work for you. The transformer piece from here is really the tool that kind of makes all this stuff really work. So it figures out how those words fit together, those images fit together in different sentences, and how to really create all of those things that are there. So that's what the GPT part of that really means. So how can this be applied to you all? So let's take a look. I'm going to exit out of this screen here really quickly because I wanted to try to show you this in a live mode here. And let's go into a quick GPT session that's here. So what I did is I took some underwriting guidelines and some rates, and I mixed them up between some carriers so it wasn't a single carrier that's out there. And what I wanted it to do was say, hey, tell me the underwriting class of a male that's age 55, weighs 265 pounds, smokes a cigar every 2 days, drinks an old fashioned every night, lives in Florida, has 3 speeding tickets, in the last 6 months, has a family history of cancer, had a hip replacement in March, and is a master scuba diver and a skydiver. Now, that's pretty crazy, right? Trying to find somebody to get that, is going to be tough. But let's find out what GPT actually says and see if it'll come back. So what it's doing is it's going back, it's taking a look at all the information that we put into it, that we stored in it, and it's making some just calculations. Hey, this is what I've heard. So we've got the age, we've got the smoking pieces that are there, the family history, and all of those things. It's coming back and it's making some recommendations. Now, I know this recommendation isn't going to be all the way right because we don't have all of the information that we need, but what it's saying here is that, hey, given that accumulation of all the risks and the things that are there, that it is, he's probably not going to get a preferred. It may be a standard or something else that's there. So the idea behind this really is just to show you really quickly with something that's simple, we can take those rates and we can make the machine learn differently on it. And it can come back and we can narrow this field down more. We can take a look at it and say, hey, after we do this, how can we get a quote for this individual? Or how can we populate some of this information in an application to kick it off? And how can we go out and get additional information and pull it back in? So again, just a very, very quick example of that and how you can use the GPT chat. So let's take a look at how some of you as direct marketers can embrace this whole generative AI piece. So chatbots for your consumers. There's a ton of chatbots that are out there, and they learn really, really fast on some of the things that you have. For those of you who have kind of your own technologies back there, you can tie these things back into things like their historical payments. You can talk, it can learn information about the insurance company that they're with and the policy that they have. So it can answer different questions. Hey, I missed a payment. What happens? Hey, I need to add a beneficiary. What can I do? And that chatbot can go off and grab that and bring back and pull back a website or a link that they can go off to, or it can deliver them a form or tell them that they can mail them the form or email them the form out for it. So there's really cool things that you can do with inside of that. This is another good one. It's agent lead scoring and routing. So as you all have agents inside of your own house, starting that call center-y type approach through there, when somebody comes in, if they fill out some information that's there and they need to talk to an agent, AI is really good to look at it and say, hey, we've got an agent or a bunch of agents. Let's score them so we know what type of agent or which specific agent that we need to route this person to have the best success in having them close up that deal. Writing emails and scripts are another great one. We actually had an agent or an agency of ours where they were talking about, they sold a ton of these types of policies out there, but they had a bunch of people who were kind of bailing off a couple of months after the fact. Those payments weren't coming in or whatnot that was there. They had written out some of their own emails and trying to bust some stuff out through it. But what they did is they used this ChatGPT to come in. They put in a few pieces to it. It wrote out some emails. It asked, kind of when they should be sending some stuff out there. They moved from a 5 or a 6% change rate where those consumers actually started paying to about a 25% change rate where those people started paying those bills again. So it's just another way of kind of looking at it, getting a fresh view of what those are. And then the policy reviews, this is a great one too. The generative AI can scan through documents and it can start making recommendations on the things that it learns. So if we've got a guarantee period that's coming up, you can marry that up with different data that's out there and maybe make a product recommendation for your sales agent to pick up the phone and call that consumer through there for it. So some great additional ways to kind of think about that and how you as DMs can maybe embrace the generative AI piece a little bit differently. All right, so I'm going to turn the time over to Harim and have her kind of walk you through where we start seeing some of the insurance companies and how they're doing things today.
Thanks, Roy. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the use of generative AI and other tools to understand natural language in the field of risk assessment primarily. And I'll talk a little bit about, our experience there. So typically we at Munich Re work with a lot of insurance companies. And as Roy mentioned, we see there's so many people trying out the use of large language models, how it's going to work and all those pieces. So the two things that we see that, Roy also mentioned that direct marketers can utilize is this idea of chatbots. When you're managing the direct relationship with the consumer and managing, the policy administration, all those pieces, introducing a chatbot can really help people understand complex products a lot better and also get access to any agents or things they might need to do through that way. The other piece that Roy talked about was policy review. So one thing we're seeing for really complex policies and financial structures, what people will try to use policy explainers. So say explain like I'm five this very complicated financial structure that might be going on in something more complicated, the term life product. But the thing that we're really experts in at Munich Re, we have a tool called Alethea, which provides risk assessment as a service. And we've really been exploring the use of these transformer architectures, whether it's through this ChatGPT style large language model or other architectures in improving risk assessment. And two big use cases that I'll talk about today is this idea of parsing electronic health records or parsing free text and applications. So we've got all this data that technically maps in to information we've collected historically, but we don't have rules around it. Previously worked with disclosures or rules around prescription history and all that, but now we're getting the same information but coming in different contexts. How do you merge all that information, and how do you leverage the fact that these AI models can understand language structure rather than getting them to actually decision on like whether or not a diabetes case is severe or something like that. So if you go to the next slide. And Roy actually did a fantastic job covering all of the technical components you need to kind of understand these pieces too, right? So, but the one thing I want to touch on is this idea of a transformer. So transformers were introduced by a team of Google researchers in 2017, and it really changed the game when it came to these general purpose models. Previously, you may have heard of carriers building, or even other industries, people building task-specific machine learning models, right? Like going to predict X output if you put in this input. But these transformer architectures started and made it easier to train on larger data sets. And what that came up with was Google introduced this thing called BERT, and then there was also BioBERT. And it's a language model that's trained with about 200 million parameters, and it does a really good job of identifying missing text, or it does a really good job of identifying the medical words in a sentence. It's like a very specific trained objective function. But the things we've been talking about previously with this generative AI is once those language models get to a specific size, and that's typically in the range of having 50 billion to 100 billion parameters, which is huge, both in terms of compute cost and the data that's used to kind of train these models, they start having these generative properties, right? So and they can answer these questions in a way that make a lot of sense. So they're not task oriented, task specific. They're around this language modeling where they've literally just been trained on large corpus of text to predict the next word, but they're able to do it in a lot of different contexts, which is the fascinating part. And it's not completely clear how it necessarily works. And a lot of tools that you see out there will be implemented with a lot of guardrails to prevent things going awry. But I'll give an example of something we've used that uses, this smaller scale large language model. So this is not a generative AI model, but this is something we use within Alethea, our risk assessment and service tool, where we parse when an applicant is filling out an application, they might put in some more details like, we might ask a question, oh, do you have any other medical follow-up? And they might put in, like, for example, these are real cases. So it's like, last doctor visit was due to a bee sting, ended as just a wellness check. In typical programs, and every time an applicant puts in free text, that would be referred to an underwriter for review. But if the case looks really clear, we can use a large language model and here add in, first we look for medical text, and then we map it to ICD codes. And in this case, are able to identify whether it's a drug or map it to a specific impairment, specific condition. And then we have a list of serious conditions that we would like an underwriter review follow up with. But if something looks fine, like if it's a bee sting, injury or poisoning, and there's like a temporal component to it, we're able to still accelerate that case, right? So this can negatively impact the straight through processing rate of somebody filling out an online application by more than 10%. But since we've introduced this tool, which leverages, again, a simplified version of a large language model, very task oriented, focused on the medical component of it, we're able to improve that acceleration rate. So that's an example of like an old school transformer architecture. So if you go to the next slide, this is where we're leveraging something similar to what Roy was talking about. So Roy talked about really big use cases. The thing is, when you're doing risk assessment, we have to make sure that we're leveraging the parts that map really well. So one of the things that we have with Alethea is we have a set of questions, right, that we might ask, but carriers may have their own set of filed questions. So one of the things we worked on using a large language model, we didn't use ChatGPT because there's some concerns about sharing our private data through that. So we used an open source language model that's available through Facebook, and we deployed it on our own architecture, and we're able to kind of manage it. And so in this one, this was the instruction we gave it at the top. Based on the following information, answer the question below only with yes, no, or missing info. Then we pass through the information. Then we can ask it a question, and then it can give this answer no. And that's the example that we gave it. And that's another thing that you can do is you can kind of tune these language models, giving it these examples. And Roy gave his prompt a specific example. And then you can set up the problem so it can iterate over your whole loop and ask it a question in a different context. Like, even though we asked it this exact question had to do with the endocrine system, the next thing that we can go ahead and ask about high blood pressure or hypertension, which is a whole different impairment setup. And we found this has really good performance. So we could get 76% accuracy. So getting it to agree with the human performance of it. And this reduced that time because, if you get a set of reflexive questions through, you could have, like, depending on how complex the application is, you could have hundreds, up to 1,000 reflexive questions that get asked. And we reduce that time of mapping in all this data coming in from new source into, under a minute. And I know this is not the sexiest use case, but I wanted to talk through something that is real. And we started with something very small. So here we're not leveraging ChatGPT or this transformer architecture's ability to understand, like, here's the exact, we don't need it to know anything about like endocrine or something like that, right? We just need it to understand the architecture or the framework or the data structure. And so this also applies to in cases where we have many different types of data telling the same thing about an applicant. For example, we might have prescription history, we could have EHRs, and you just want to put it all into one place and ask, does this applicant have a history of diabetes, right? And so what this allows us to do is ask applicants less questions, get more accurate disclosures, and parse very complex data structures without requiring human review. So in the world of risk assessment, I think people are going to start exploring this further and further. I don't know if we'll ever get to the point where an underwriter can sit down and completely type in, give me all the details. But as Roy presented, that already has such good results. Like, you can just go through and do all that. So, but that's our focus there, is improving risk assessment and utilizing all the tools that are available. Now, if we go to the next slide, governance is also in my title. So I work on, operationalizing machine learning solutions, but also wondering about, what are the governance requirements and considerations. So the biggest thing when it comes to all of these tools is this idea of hallucination, where they can make up information sometimes, right? And there was a case of a lawyer in New York who prepared a whole brief and filed it in court using ChatGPT, and it had just made up cases that didn't exist. So you definitely don't want something like that happening. And there's a lot of techniques around guardrails, and I think those techniques will continue to evolve as time goes on. On the regulatory side, there's also this concern that if you're sharing sensitive personal information or data to an organization like OpenAI that manages ChatGPT, how do you ensure that your data remains separate, right? Especially when in an industry work with very sensitive, personally identifiable health and other information, and lots of details about financial records. And I'll give an example of why that could be really bad. There's a tool that we use to manage code, and it's called GitHub. And they introduced this tool called Copilot, which would help coders or developers fill, like, kind of autocomplete code. Like, code is very specific syntax that is quite easy, right? And what it ended up doing was you would put in, for example, security underscore key equals, and it would put in a key that it had found by trawling through somebody's GitHub repo. So it was putting in private keys and passwords that people had, put out there by accident or something, but magnifying their error by putting in both, their login and password in a sense. So things like that happen, right? It's an unintended consequence, and avoiding that in a context where we have very sensitive health information is imperative. So those are the two examples I had, and I'm sure people have many more examples they can come up with around this, but I don't want to be a party pooper, so I didn't want to talk about, here's something very small, very cool we're doing, and then these are some things to be concerned about. And that's all the content I had. So Roy, I can turn it back over to you.
Great. Yeah, thanks for running us through that. I know that there's always a lot of concern about the governance part of this and kind of how it's going, and a lot of carriers are concerned around the legality parts of this and the bias pieces and all those things that kind of go along in it. So we're up against time. I just want to be cognizant of it. There are some questions that came through. What we'll do is take those offline. We'll answer all of those. We'll make sure that they get sent out to you along with the link to the video, just so that you've got that. I didn't want to not leave without just giving you some other great resources that are out there. So the NAIC has a really good site where they are talking a lot more about kind of where this regulation is headed and kind of things that are happening out there, just to kind of stay abreast of what it is. That AI tool set that I talked about earlier, where it's just got a bunch of these AI type pieces that are out there, these gen pieces. It's the, there's an AI for that.com was a good one. And then our buddies over at InsurTech Express. So Ken Lebo's done a really good job. He took just recently how to use GBT and pull in and build a PowerPoint. So that's the link for that. That was a really cool one. And then our buddies at Celent too. Celent's got some great things that are happening, and they're really involved into the whole AI piece of the world and what's happening there. And they've got some really good resources that you all should take a look at as well. So again, just in essence of time, we promised that we wouldn't take more than about 30 minutes today. So thank you all for your time. Thank you, Harim, for joining me today as well. It was great to spend some time with you all. Hopefully you learned a little bit. I know it was fast, but hopefully you learned a little bit through there. And we look forward to talking to you all more in the future. Have a great day.
Everyone. Thanks, Roy. Bye.